time. Speedrunning is a race against time. In any game or activity you speedrun, the point is to complete it as fast as possible. It's a great concept because it focuses so much on self-improvement and breaking the limits that were previously thought to be impossible. In Trackmania speedrunning, it is no longer just a race against time, but a race against fractions of time. Because in the world's most competitive racing game, players take speedrunning to the extremes and battle for world records by just hundredths of a second. All the cars in Trackmania are completely identical, and the physics are completely deterministic, meaning that there's nothing random going on in the game, and the only way you can gain time is by driving better racing lines and executing tricks better. The best Trackmania players are optimizing everything they possibly can, and over the last 13 years, they've pushed the world records in the game closer and closer to perfection. AO1 Race is the first track in Trackmania nations forever, and over the years, millions of players have set foot on this track, and thousands have battled for the world record. It's the most prestigious record to hold in the entire game, and up until recently, the world record on the track was a 23.83 by Trackmania. The 23.83 by Trackmania was set in June of 2020, and it long reigned as one of the greatest records achieved in Trackmania history, with this record being 0.03 of a second faster than what any other player had achieved on such a competitive track. And it perfectly encapsulated what speedrunning is all about, that of setting a goal for yourself, putting great effort into practicing and refining your skill, and having the dedication to see it through until you get a near perfect run. Trackmania claimed to have spent almost 1,000 hours on the map to achieve this record, and during that time, he set many other records that were faster than what other players could achieve. He was just on a level above everyone else, and it was awe-inspiring to follow his journey and see how far he could push the record. But sadly, if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And Trackmania's case was no different. During the recent cheating scandal in Trackmania, it was discovered that Trackmania's AO1 world records were all cheated, leaving everyone in the Trackmania community speechless. It was just unbelievable for us to think that one of the greatest Trackmania records wasn't done legitimately, and that such a good Trackmania player as Trackmania would cheat. But that's what happened. And Riolu, who was in second place on the leaderboards with a 23.86, was also found to be cheating by playing the game in slow motion. And when both of their records were deleted, the AO1 race world record was sent all the way back to a 23.87, driven by Kripke in 2014. 7 years of perceived progress on the track was lost, and a really bad stain was left on Trackmania's most prestigious leaderboard. To the community, the whole situation was tragic. But all hope wasn't lost, because in adversity there's also opportunity, and on AO1 Race, there was now a chance to repair the damage the cheaters had done. And some top-level players wanted to bring the world record back to its former glory and try to beat the cheaters legitimately. To start, let's have a look at the track. Apart from driving good racing lines and going as close to the walls as possible, there are 3 main sections where you can gain time on AO1 Race: the downhill, the speed slide, and the uphill. The first section, the downhill, takes place just after the start, and here it is vital to reduce airtime as much as possible. The Trackmania car only accelerates when the wheels have contact with the ground, and since the rest of the track is driven at full speed after the downhill, it is vital to land as early as possible, so that you can start accelerating again quickly. This is best done by doing a short release of the acceleration, while also jumping diagonally. Doing this, you travel a longer distance than jumping straight, meaning you have to release the acceleration less, and you will be able to carry more speed as you land in the downhill. Following that, the track takes a sharp left turn, before getting to the second important section, the speed slide. Here it is very important to be fully on the right side of the track at the entry to the turn. Then steer left, and do as quick of a brake tap as possible. This will make the car start sliding. And when you're sliding at high speed in Trackmania, at a very specific angle, the car will actually accelerate faster than if you're just driving straight. This is what's known as a speed slide. The goal of the speed slide is to build up as much speed as possible before the final jump, and to compete for the world record, this slide has to be perfect for the entire turn. Any small error, whether it's steering too much, known as an oversteer, or not steering enough, known as an understeer, will cost you massive amounts of speed. Then we get to the third part of AO1 race, the uphill, where players abruptly steer to the right to go up the hill. While this looks awkward, the movement causes the car's back wheels to touch the ground sooner, and thus they accelerate a little bit more before the last jump, gaining a few hundredths at high speeds. Combining these three parts at the highest level without losing even a hundredth of a second is just immensely difficult to do. And for a long time, nobody was able to beat the track in under 23.90 seconds. The first player to do so legitimately was the player Kripke, who in December of 2014 achieved a 23.87 on the track, doing everything close to perfect. For a while, it was thought that this was as low as the record would go on AO1 race, as it becomes absurdly difficult to gain any significant time after reaching 23.87. But as the years went on, there would be some very interesting developments on AO1. In October of 2019, Riolu set his 23.86 record on the track, which was later found out to be cheated by playing in slow motion. But at the time, this was seen as a grand accomplishment by the community. And then, in May of 2020, a big hype started forming around AO1 race, when the players Roland, Trackmania and Dwarker all started going for the 86 themselves, or maybe even 23.85. On the 5th of May 2020, Dwarker would drive a historic run on AO1 race. He started by getting a decent downhill, being a few thousandths of a second ahead of Kripke after the turn, and then, in the ending, he got the greatest speed slide anyone had ever seen on the track, holding the exact angle perfectly all the way through the turn. He was way ahead of the record, and all he had to do in those split seconds was aim his car towards the finish at the last jump, and the world record would be his. But Dwarker angled slightly towards the right on the jump, and across such a big distance, a tiny difference can have a big consequence. All Dwarker could hope for was that the car wouldn't crash before reaching the finish line, but with only one block left to go, Dwarker's back wheel touched the wall, and it resulted in him getting a 23.87. And if he hadn't crashed, Dwarker would have had the new world record of 23.85. But it just wasn't meant to be, and despite seeming like the top contender to take the record, someone else would beat him to it. Because 1 week later, on the 12th of May 2020, Trackmania set a 23.87 on the track. At first, it seemed rather inconspicuous, as Trackmania had steadily climbed up the leaderboards in the weeks prior, first getting a 23.89 and then a 88. But Trackmania would quickly show that he was on another level, because the very next day, he set a new record of 23.85 on the track. It's hard to emphasize the gravity of this record. Trackmania's personal best was still 23.87 before this run, meaning that he skipped past 23.86. But this run certainly wasn't a fluke. Over those 2 days in May of 2020, Trackmania had gotten 5 23.87s, 19 23.88s, and 30 23.89s, before he got the eventual .85. The Trackmania community saw this as an incredible achievement, and many of us thought that the record would stand forever. But in the next week, Trackmania would tie the 23.85 6 more times, for a total of 7 23.85 runs. Other AO1 specialists like Roland couldn't fathom how he could be that consistent at the speed slide, something that he'd only gotten perfect a handful of times in his hundreds of hours on the map. But Trackmania was getting a perfect speed slide almost every time. And 2 days later, Trackmania lowered the record again, down to a 23.84. And then, somehow after reaching 23.84, Trackmania kept playing the map for the next 2 weeks. And in the start of June of 2020, he uploaded an unimaginable, unthinkable 23.83. On Trackmania's most competitive track, a record that had been actively fought for and optimized ever since 2008. Trackmania was now 300ths of a second ahead of anyone else. It's the reason why this record was so highly regarded in Trackmania, as one of the peak achievements in the game's history. The story of the player who, despite holding the world record, pushed further and further for perfection was a story that we all wanted to believe. But sadly, it was just a little too good to be true. Everyone trusted Trackmania and nobody thought that he would cheat the records. But early in 2021, when Donadigo and I conducted a cheating investigation on Trackmania replays, we looked into Trackmania's AO1 world record and found something very strange about his speed slide. Trackmania replays store the exact inputs a player did in their run, and when comparing Trackmania's speed slide to other players, there was a stark difference. Other players' speed slides, like Dwarker's and Kripke's, consisted of hundreds of tiny movements, whereas Trackmania's consisted of a few very robotic-looking steering values. This didn't seem normal at all, but when we looked more into it, the picture became much more clear. As it turns out, Trackmania's inputs in his speed slides on AO1 were the exact same every single time. Not even the slightest fluctuation, but exactly the same inputs. This level of precision simply isn't possible to have consistently, as the steering range in Trackmania has 65,000 possible values. And after we confronted Trackmania about it, he confessed to cheating on AO1 race using macros in a twit longer. In the twit longer, he mentions how he became obsessed with perfection on the map, which eventually led to cheating that he felt he couldn't control. He says that he didn't do it to glorify himself or out of narcissism, and that he almost never played Trackmania with the goal of being first. Instead, he says that if there was a public tool-assisted speedrunning tool in Trackmania, he'd want to become a tool-assisted speedrunner. He also says that his idea was to reach a semblance of perfection, and then he would feel happy. But no matter how many times he improved, he never felt satisfied. Nobody would have any problem with Trackmania using macros to execute perfect speed slides if he stated that his runs were tool-assisted from the beginning. The problem is that he claimed his runs were achieved legitimately, and uploaded them to the leaderboards, where they absolutely do not belong, and on several occasions, for months after setting the records, claimed that they were legitimate in videos and in messages. The focus of his obsession also seemed to revolve around being perceived as a perfect player, rather than just reaching the limit on the track, as he was often seeking approval and validation for the runs. Even in his apology, he claimed to have achieved a 2384 without macros, but provided no evidence of the run, leaving a sour taste for anyone that would now want to go for the AO1 world record. 1 year earlier, Dwarker was just a few pixels away from making history on the track, and with the news of the cheaters now being gone, he decided to try to repair the damage they had done, and started going for the world record on AO1 race once again. And after only a few days of grinding, on the 5th of June 2021, Dwarker got this run on AO1 race. (2386), the new world record on AO1 race. This was an incredible run by Dwarker. He had a fast start with a good downhill, and reached 479 speed after the speed slide and the uphill, which was just barely enough to break the 2387 tie and claim the first ever legitimate 2386. Trackmania records are rounded down to the 100th of a second, but you can also check what thousandth of a second they crossed the finish line. Dwarker's new AO1 record ended up being a 23.867, whereas Riolu's cheated 86 was a 869, meaning Dwarker had not only set a new world record, he'd also beaten one of the cheaters on AO1 race. It was an amazing achievement from Dwarker, but now it was hard to imagine the world record going much lower. The only difference between Trackmania's runs and Dwarker's run was the speed slide. but robotically holding the exact steering values that generate the most amount of speed simply isn't possible to replicate, because controllers in Trackmania generally fluctuate between steering values of 500, even if you hold the stick perfectly still. Despite Trabadia's records being removed from the leaderboards, it seemed like his claim of 2384 and his cheated 83 run would haunt the track's history forever. And it very well could have if a new strategy hadn't been discovered. But somehow, after 13 years of competition on AO1 Race, there was a new strategy that nobody had discovered until the 1st of June 2021, when the player LX created a tool-assisted speedrun of 2378. What LX had discovered was that it was possible to speed slide the first corner as well. Speed sliding in Trackmania is only faster when going at over 400 speed, and it turns out that this is just barely possible in the first corner of AO1. But the problem is that you have to tap brake to initiate the slide, which loses a bit of time, so you must slide for long enough afterwards that you can compensate for the time loss. After the slide, LX was still behind, but he had more speed than the previous tool-assisted record, and this tiny bit of extra speed snowballs through the next speed slide and the rest of the track. Alex's new task record regained all the time it lost and more before the finish line, saving 0.02 of a second. At first, this new speed slide was deemed too hard for human runs, but Roland decided to experiment with it, and he very quickly noticed that it could potentially save time humanly as well. So he started going for attempts with a double speed slide. And after a few days of grinding, Roland would show the potential of the double speed slide strategy, when he tied Dwarker's 2386 record on AO1. Then, 2 days later, Roland shared another AO1 run with the community. (2385). A new world record on AO1 Race, with a new strategy. The last time the track saw a strategy innovation like this one was nearly 10 years ago, so this was a big deal. But Roland wasn't done yet. As he said in his own words, this was only the beginning. He kept grinding AO1 Race, and 2 days later, he got this run. (2384). Roland was the new king of AO1 Race. He was leagues above anyone else on the track, and the entire community cheered him on to keep going, and try to break the 2383, which was the final hurdle to return the AO1 leaderboard to its former glory. And though there now wasn't much room for improvement left, Roland knew he had it within him to get the improvement. And 5 days later, history was made on AO1 Race when Roland got this run. (2383). Roland had done it. Another new world record and another incredible accomplishment on AO1 Race. This run really had everything. A good start and downhill, followed by 2 perfect speed slides, being just enough to clinch another 100th of a second on the track. Looking at the AO1 Race leaderboards again, it was as if despite the tragedy of the cheating scandal, nothing had really changed. It took an immense effort from both players, but at long last, Roland and Dwarker had successfully brought the AO1 record back to its former glory. But the hype for AO1 race was far from over. Because of the new double speed slide strategy, many players were grinding the track, and the leaderboard was getting packed with runs under 23.90. A few days after Roland's record, Heffest managed a 23.85, and the week after that, Lakadal drove a 23.86, and Dwarker managed a 23.85 of his own. Originally, Dwarker didn't believe in the double speed slide idea, but after seeing Roland's success with it, he decided to give it a real shot, and 1 week later, he improved his personal best with it again, down to a 23.84, just 1/100th of a second behind Roland. Dwarker was getting close, and he felt that he still had a little bit of room to improve. He just needed that one run where everything aligned perfectly. On the 17th of July, Dwarker had a great chance at beating the record. He got onto a run with an exceptional start, getting a perfect downhill and a near perfect speed slide. Before the second checkpoint, Dwarker had a 1/100th of a second lead over Roland, with even more speed. All he had to do was execute a decent second speed slide, and the record would be his. But in the final turn, Dwarker held the brake a bit too long to initiate the speed slide, and he also didn't slide at the exact optimal angle, costing him speed. And across the final jump, his lead had completely vanished, and it resulted in a 23.83. It was a new personal best and a world record tie on Trackmania's most prestigious track. But to Dwarker, it was somewhat disappointing that he couldn't hold the lead on such a strong start. Still, Dwarker knew that it was just a matter of time. He really was just one good run away from making history. And on the very next day, the 18th of July, Dwarker got on another fast start. And this one, he wasn't gonna let go to waste. (23.81), an absolutely groundbreaking time. Dwarker had skipped directly past the 82 and improved the AO1 world record by 2/100ths of a second, a feat that hadn't been done since 2014 on the track. The run itself is absolutely mesmerizing to watch. It tethers right at the limit of what is humanly possible on the map, and it beautifully encapsulates what speedrunning is all about. That of setting a goal for yourself, putting great effort into practicing and refining your skills, and having the dedication to see it through until you get a near perfect run. And that is where the AO1 race world record stands today. But a little while after Dwarker's record, Lakadal achieved a 23.82 on the track, so this might not be where the story ends. Looking at the leaderboard as a whole, the top 10 records is much stronger than it was just 1 year prior, and it just goes to show how in adversity, there is always opportunity. The cheating scandal was not the be-all end-all of Trackmania speedrunning. In fact, it was a breath of life on many tracks, as players now had a target to chase and a reason to continue hunting. It's definitely going to take more than a few cheaters to kill the Trackmania speedrunning scene. I predict it will continue to thrive for many years to come, and as it does, I'll be here to continue telling the stories of the many great accomplishments by the players, and I hope that you will continue to enjoy them. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, then please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss when I upload new Trackmania content. Also, a big thank you to all my Patreon supporters for your incredible generosity. Without you, this would not have been possible. If you want to become a patron, there's a link in the description below. Anyways, that's all for now guys, I will see you all in the next video, and until then, have a good one.